For over 35 years, Todd Garner has overseen blockbuster films like Con Air, Anger Management, Triple X, 13 Going on 30, and the Mortal Kombat franchise.
Why are they letting you make these movies?
Join Todd as he shares tips and stories from the front lines of producing in Hollywood.
I'm Adam Sandler.
I'm Rebel Wilson.
This is Jeff Probst.
I'm Kaylee Cuoco.
I'm Eli Roth.
This is Marlon Wayans.
Hey, it's Ed Helms.
This is Shay Mitchell.
Hey everybody, this is Kevin James, and this is The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide with Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
What a combination.
Welcome to The Producer's Guide. Today we have an exceptional guest, Janet Yang, an Emmy and Golden Globe winning Hollywood producer who recently wrapped up 3 groundbreaking years as president of the Academy of the Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, making history as the first Asian American to hold this prestigious role. Janet has a remarkable journey, having collaborated with legends like Steven Spielberg on Empire of the Sun and forging a long-standing partnership with Oliver Stone, where she served as executive producer on the iconic Joy Luck Club and produced the Golden Globe-winning The People vs. Larry Flynt. Her recent projects include the 2025 Tribeca Audience Award-winning documentary The Rose Come Back to Me, the Sundance premiering feature Take Me Home, and the Oscar-nominated animated film Over the Moon. Janet's impressive portfolio also features work with Meryl Streep in Dark Matter and Sean Penn in The Weight of Water. Recognized as one of the 50 most powerful women in Hollywood by The Hollywood Reporter and included in Variety's Power of Women, Janet is also co-founder of Gold House and serves on multiple boards. Currently, she's a presidential fellow at Loyola Marymount University and holds an honorary degree from Bowdoin College. Join us as we deep dive into Janet's inspiring story, her insights on the industry, and what's next for her in this ever-evolving landscape of storytelling. Enjoy. All right, I'm here with Janet Yang. Hello, Janet. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you doing, Todd? It's 2026 already.
Whether we like it or not. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. And you're a fellow Producers United member. You were president of the Academy. You're very, very involved in all things film business, television. You've been so great about being an activist for producers and for the business. And I'm so glad that you're doing this. I want to start at the beginning. You were born in Queens. Your parents immigrated from China. Walk me through little girl in Queens and then being interested in film and television. How did that itch come about that you needed to scratch?
Well, little girl in Queens was in an entirely white Jewish neighborhood. Maybe that prepared me well for Hollywood. But Los Angeles, Hollywood was as distant as another planet. And my parents, by the way, hadn't actually immigrated. They came over as students.
Okay.
And then they got stranded here. So they lived their lives kind of in limbo for quite a few years, trying to figure out, are we going back? Are we staying? In the meantime, they had a couple of kids. My mother ended up getting a job at the United Nations. And finally, around the time I was born there had been a 10-year debate, like, are we coming and going? So my older brother and sister probably grew up with some of that uncertainty. But by the time I came around, they decided they were going to make life in America because it seemed too difficult to go back to China. And given my mother's background at the United Nations, they then accused her of being a spy. So it was a whole thing there. I loved movies. Just recently I celebrated a big birthday with my sister, and I actually gave her a lot of credit for my passion for movies because she would take me to everything, totally inappropriate movies that I was watching at a young age. But I was always so fascinated. I was like glued to the television screen. I went to the movies, but I never imagined I would ever have a place in the movie business. It just didn't occur to me. I never saw anybody that looked like me in any creative field, frankly. My father was an engineer. Everybody was, Chinese parents want your kids to be doctors or lawyers or engineers at best. And so I really didn't know what I wanted to do because I knew I didn't want those things. I absolutely knew what I did not want to do. And I had a lot of different interests, and it took me a long time to figure out what I could do and what I wanted to do. But so grew up in that, in kind of that period of not knowing. But in high school, in high school, I took my first trip to China because it was 1972. Nixon and Kissinger had just gone back. My parents had not seen their relatives in almost 30 years. And they said, despite other people's cautionary tales, they said, we're going back, we're going to visit our relatives because they miss them terribly. So, in fact, my mother and I went back on a separate trip because they were so worried if we all went together, then what would happen if we got stuck? So that trip in the summer of 1972, when I was 15 going on 16, was life-changing because I met all my relatives for the first time, and that was the first itch, was that, oh, I really need to know more about this country that I almost grew up in. I need to know Chinese. I need to know more about that. I was so fascinated by my relatives' lives, even though it was so different they were so different from mine, but everything about the country fascinated me. And so it was just that curiosity that led me to my second trip to China, which was after college. And by then I decided I was going to study Chinese studies, and I had kind of a path. I still didn't know what I was going to do. And my own parents, who really wanted me to be as Chinese as I could be growing up in an all-white neighborhood, were actually concerned once I declared Chinese studies as my major, because they were like, well, where's that going to lead? And I really had no idea, frankly. But while I was living now in China in the early 1980s, I saw movies and television shows for the first time by, for, and about people that looked like me. And I met a ton of artists and writers, and I just gravitated to this emerging group of this new generation of filmmakers, musicians, writers, artists who were coming out of the Cultural Revolution and finding more freedom to express themselves. And I just found, there was the first rock star, the first painters that became famous, and the first filmmakers that became well known. So I found a cause then, which was to bring Chinese cinema out for the rest of the world to see, particularly the people in the West, because I knew that it would affect how we were perceived, which is exactly how I felt when I saw these films. Like, oh, we can be so three-dimensional. We can play so many different roles. We can, that the whole idea that we could have a creative spirit and express ourselves, that was literally an epiphany for me, because I, again, didn't think I had no examples of that growing up. So I could ramble on forever, but I'll end it there and let you ask.
So when you leave China and you come back here, did you have it in your mind that you wanted to be in the business, or were you at that point more interested in importing Chinese?
I didn't think I could be in the business. All I knew that I could do, because I'd gotten to know some Chinese filmmakers. Again, it never occurred to me that I could be behind the camera, but I thought, oh, well, let's just bring these Chinese films over. So I actually started organizing some Chinese film screenings. I also ended up going to business school. I was living in New York at the time. And I would walk to the Chinese consulate in New York, which is on 42nd Street and 12th Avenue, with these giant 35 millimeter canisters, like to the subway stop, and, to show these films. And that was just something that I thought, oh, well, this is one thing I can do, but I still didn't know what I really wanted to be when I grew up. I was doing it kind of on the side. And then luckily, some people that I met said they wanted to start a distribution company that had a theater in San Francisco, and they wanted to show Chinese films. And so I kind of raised my hand and said, oh, well, I might be a good candidate for you to run that company, which is what happened as soon as I graduated from business school. I had that piece of paper that I probably didn't really earn, because everybody was gunning for jobs at McKinsey and Bain and Goldman. And I'm like, nah, I still don't want to do that. I thought business school might change my attitude, but it didn't at all. I was just so firmly leaning towards the arts.
And at one point, Kathy Kennedy and Steven Spielberg enter the picture.
Yes. So
in a weird phone call that is unbelievable.
It's an unbelievable phone call. So I was in San Francisco. The first thing that happens is in San Francisco, in my basement office that I shared with Wayne Wang, And I just remember it so clearly because the person who came to visit me, we laugh about this all the time. His name was Skip Paul. He had just been hired by Wasserman and Scheinberg to start a new division of Universal. At the time, it was MCA Universal. Some of you may remember.
Mm-hmm.
And he was given the opportunity to work on cross-disciplinary projects. And one of them was China. He said, it's about time we went to China and tried to open up the market for American movies because there hadn't been any. So he visited me in San Francisco. He saw me in an article in the San Francisco Chronicle and said, I want to come visit. He came to visit, and then he offered me a position at Universal, which at the time was part of a consortium with Paramount and MGM-UA. Anyway, so now I'm in the Black Tower in my office, also still flying back and forth to China as I was before, but now I'm taking American films to China, and I'm actually also accompanying Gregory Peck to China for a retrospective of his work, taking filmmakers. I ended up taking the Scheinbergs over, and it was kind of fun because it was I was introducing China to a whole bunch of people, that had that curiosity. So I'm in my office there. I had just been hired by Skip to do this, and we were taking a lot of trips together. And then he sort of set me on my own, and then I got a call one day from Kathy Kennedy, and she said, I heard you go back and forth to China a lot. I said, I do. She said, well, Steven wants to make a movie in China. I said, great. And so they sent a little golf cart over to the tower so I can go to the Taco Bell offices in the back lot. We had a meeting, and one thing led to another. And it was a Warner Brothers movie, so I was basically on loan to Warner Brothers for the movie. And, Skip was so wonderful. He encouraged, because I was so nervous. I was like, God, he hired me for this job, and now I'm just going to go take off. And he completely encouraged me to do that. That's why I believe so much in mentorship. He said, of course, you have to grow. This is an incredible opportunity. Go.
A couple of things to explain. The Taco Bell offices are the Amblin offices because they do look like an Adobe,
They're an Adobe, yes.
a very high-end Mexican restaurant, if you will. Sorry, Amblin. And then secondarily, that movie was Empire of the Sun, which was a Warner Brothers movie.
With an 11-year-old Christian Bale, John Malkovich, Joe Pantoliano. I was hired primarily for the Shanghai portion of the shoot, which was only about 3 weeks of production, but it was many, 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 many months of pre-production, setting up the shoot, getting the permissions. It really was, it was so ironic. It was 1986, and Bertolucci at the same time was making The Last Emperor in Beijing. So there was a lot of excitement about China. They were so eager to please, but it was a lot, but they had never experienced a production this size. As Steve and I reminisce, there was no CGI then. So if we needed 10,000 extras to fill the background, we got 10,000 bodies.
Oh.
And, and the whole city of Shanghai pretty much shut down. And it was a moment in time. That's something else we reminisce about. It's like that was a moment in time where the infrastructure in China was just mature enough to handle us, but the city had not changed so much as it has today that, so we could recreate the period Shanghai. It would be virtually impossible to do that today.
Wow. And you had the coolest job in the world, which is ride to and from the set with Steven Spielberg. Is there anything better than that? You know what's
There's
crazy?
There's nothing better. So then I thought, okay, well, it doesn't get better than this. I can die and go to heaven now.
Well, what's crazy is I have actually never met Steven Spielberg.
No.
Nope. In my entire 37 years or 8 years in the business. I know. It's like, so if anybody out there can introduce me to Steven Spielberg, please connect us. I would love to meet him. I've been in the same room with him. I've seen him. It's weird.
Was so proud too. I was watching clips from the Golden Globes, and he was accompanying Chloe Zhao. He's
amazing.
Such an incredible mentor. There's so many people that he's mentored. I would say I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but one of the greatest gifts of being president of the Academy is that we have these nominee dinners for each branch. So the year that Steven had a movie, so did the Daniels from Everything Everywhere, Ruben Östlund, Edward Berger. And just being in that room and being a fly on the wall and
Oh,
how much other people worship him, but then how generous he is and how curious and excited he is by everybody else's work. I think he's a rare bird that way. And it keeps him so young and vibrant because I think he loves film and he loves, mentoring is like even understating it. The way he supports and encourages and the stories about how he brought the project to Chloe and all that.
Yeah.
He's absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
So when you're riding to and from the set with him in Shanghai, anything that comes to mind that you learned what's your biggest takeaway from that period? Because you then go work for Amblin, right? You then go to work for him. So walk me through that period and kind of
So,
what the takeaway
so
is.
many things. I remember sitting in their screening room because the Chinese wanted to get a list of Steven's top 10 movies.
Oh my
And
God.
this happened actually prior to the shoot, prior to pre-production. I remember sitting with him having this long conversation about his favorite movies, and we even watched some things. I have to find that list because now I can't entirely remember what was on it, but so many insights into how he looks at things. And what really amazed me actually was that his crew, which was mostly British because the film was shot additionally in the UK and in Spain, a mostly British crew, but they were so in tune to what he wanted so that he did not actually need to be there that long in pre-production. I remember he came for one trip and they had already blocked out, made suggestions of, okay, we can block off this street for this scene and da da da. He was like, yeah, that sounds good. Everything was so fast. He worked so fast. He's so facile that it wasn't belabored and like, oh, I got to really, it just, but he just has this incredible intuition about what he wants and a great team to back him up. And another thing that I remember so well is there was a day where it was raining, it was cold, we had a bunch of extras, it was people pulling rickshaws, and it was one of those crowd scenes, and there were many, many takes, and I could tell they were getting tired and grumpy and like, why are we doing this again? They didn't understand. Like, we're doing the same thing again and again and again. What's going on?
Right.
And I said, Steven, I think it's time for a break or a pep talk or something. And it was cold and it was wet. And we moved everybody into the church where, it was like a holding area. And he got up there and I got to translate for him. And he was like, you are my heroes. I could not make this movie. It brings tears to my eyes just thinking about it because he immediately understood what was needed in the moment. Like they needed to feel the encouragement and to feel how important they were, and he's like, I could not make this movie without you. You're my heroes. And and then everybody was like, yay. And they were screaming and cheering. And, he's really good at making that kind of personal connection. So, we talked about so many things. The good news is that I was obviously a newbie in film, but I knew China. And so I could introduce him to, Chinese filmmakers and say, oh, this is the background and talk about the history of China. And so he had so much curiosity about it all. So I was really giving him kind of a primer on China, modern China, what was going on politically. He was so respectful. It was a little dicey in terms of how much openness there would be and how much they could accept us and this production. But the Shanghai Film Studio is generally very progressive. I mean, Shanghai in general is a very cosmopolitan city, and they've had a lot of interaction over the decades with the West. So it was a great place to shoot. And the Shanghai Film Studio, is in general very progressive, and they really delivered, and everybody was super happy.
When you were bringing American movies to China, do you remember what movies resonated with the Chinese? Because it was sort of a new thing. And then how did that adjust what you brought into China?
Well, that was a long debate that Skip and I had, like, what movies should we introduce? So we're in the 1980s, but we knew, like, some of the big movies that were coming out that decade, Star Wars, Back to the Future, we're like, they would not understand these. They have not seen American studio movies in decades. Those movies would feel so perplexing, I think, to them and maybe alienating. So we were like, let's go back in time. And the one movie that we picked, which to this day people talk about because we also brought the star of the movie with us, Gregory Peck, is Roman Holiday. It's
Oh,
just
wow.
a very sweet movie that, that anybody can relate to. And they love this movie. The first four movies that we distributed there, when I was running that part of the business, was Roman Holiday. The newest movie was the 1970 movie Love Story,
Oh,
which
wow.
they also really liked because we knew that was something else they could relate to, and they definitely heard about Harvard University.
Sure.
And an older movie, Spartacus, because it had a lot of kind of the political thread of what they were, aiming for at the time, which is people power.
Hmm.
And the last one was In the Heat of the Night, the Sidney Poitier movie.
Interesting.
Yes. So we were very conscientious about movies that would both be appealing, that would align with what we thought the government would appreciate, and we also gave them some choices, as I recall, but we also brought over some movies just as for special screenings. One of them I remember, which was also quite beloved, was Out of Africa.
Oh,
So the filmmakers and film officials that are still around today remember the moments where Gregory Peck was introducing Roman Holiday and, where I got to, they're like, we remember you, Jenny, you were standing next to him and you were dressed like, and like Out of Africa. And these were very, very, very special movies. And that's why I feel so strongly about the power of culture
yeah.
they were people would come up to me with tears in their eyes and they were just like, we just love these movies so much, and they were so, and it was really eye-opening. It was the same thing that now I had experienced in reverse because although it wasn't, the same broad audience with Chinese films here, it was just, oh my God, you gave me a portal into a whole world that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. So
Right. Right. Incredible. Do you remember from the list of the Steven movies you gave to them, which ones they loved?
see, that's what I don't remember.
That's okay.
There were
That's okay.
definitely some movies I've got to find that list. I remember writing it all down and I said, what's so crazy? Gregory Peck donated to the Herrick Library all his personal archives, including the letters that I wrote to him, the one where I invited him
Oh,
to China.
wow. Amazing.
I know. Somebody said they were doing research and they found this correspondence that I had with Mr. Peck.
Amazing. So let's jump ahead because there's a great story that I love, which is you fighting for Joy Luck Club and
Oh,
getting that movie made. Because the thing that I have really found in the last 10 years is I feel like there is a little bit less of people really standing on the desk and really fighting for movies at the executive level. So obviously Joy Luck Club was very important to you culturally, but walk me through a little bit about finding that book and taking that from the starting line to getting that movie made. I remember seeing it. I was at Disney and I was just so blown away by it. Walk me through kind of how that movie came about and you and your really dogged fight for that movie.
it's a good segue because after we came back from China, Kathy said, I'd like you to be a production executive working. I was employed by Universal, but my account was Amblin, which, by the way, of course, I feel embarrassed now that I had this plum account when I was just so new. But anyway, that's the way it goes. So I was now a production executive at Universal, and Kathy took me to New York to meet with publishers. So we met with a couple of people and then we went to Putnam. And I remember this meeting so well. It was with Phyllis Grant at Putnam. And she's reeling off various titles of books, upcoming books that might be interesting. And she's mostly talking to Kathy, but then like she whips her head around and she's looking at me and she's like, oh, and we just acquired this manuscript from a first-time novelist. We don't even have the whole book. We have 3 discrete chapters, and we've paid more money for this first-time novelist than we have for any other first-time novelist. And she literally hands me the pages, because back then everything was done on paper, right? And I take these pages with me on the plane back to California, and I'm like, oh my God, this is my life. How does somebody know? Because I really never read anything that was so close to my life. I mean, just the stories, the nuances. There had been a couple of other Chinese American writers. One was Maxine Hong Kingston. She wrote a book called Woman Warrior, but it was a different, very different culture. She was from the South. This was so spot on my my life, right? The daughter of parents, we had the cultural gap, the generational gap, blah blah blah. So I respond to I think it was Phyllis or whoever else was at Putnam, and I said, I love this manuscript. I was like a little bit terrified at the same time. I was like, I felt exposed. I felt naked. I was like, wait, because my life had been somewhat compartmentalized up until that point, my private life. I mean, I spent time in China. It was starting to crack open some things, but it was nothing so personal, right? They said, oh, well, why don't you get in touch with Amy? Which I did. And we met in San Francisco, and then Amy started sending me pages as she was writing them. I mean, she was very early on in the process for her. And I was reading these pages going, oh my God. And I didn't know the first thing about how to get a movie made, but all I said was, I'll do whatever I can to see this gets made into a movie. I knew it would be challenging. I didn't know how challenging. I mean, it broke every rule in the book. It was so many different time periods, a lot of subtitles, flashbacks galore. All Asian cast, obviously. Everything about it just seemed so many different storylines. It defied every convention. But fortunately, I didn't know what the conventions were that well. I hadn't imbibed all of it yet because I was so new. So I was like, yeah, of course we can make this movie. After my 2 years at being executive at Universal, I was like, I'm done with this. I actually really did. I'm not an executive. I'm not a good studio executive. I want to be on set. I want to do stuff. So a director that I had met in the meantime was starting his own company, and that person was Oliver Stone.
Wow.
So I said to Oliver, hire me. I realized now I was very brave, and twice now I was like, hire me. So he did. And I later heard that CA was kind of miffed because they had a whole long list of people that they want to introduce him to, but whatever. Anyway, he did. And I felt so fortunate because Oliver was someone we met through mutual friends. He actually was interested in these Chinese films I was showing. Long story short, we started our company in 1989, which is the same year that the book was published. By then it had become a bestseller, and it was like, oh my God, this is incredible. So I went to Oliver and I said, I love this book so much. Can we develop it? And he said, yeah, I think so. Let me look at it. And he went home that night, and his wife was reading the book. I don't know if he ever read it, obviously, but it doesn't matter. His wife was reading it, loved it. He came back the next day and said, okay, let's do it. We had a deal at the time with Carolco, which, if you recall, and many people may or may not, Mario Casar and Andy Vanya started this sort of indie studio. They were kind of, outliers in a way, and that I think Oliver really liked because they were a little bit outside the studio system. We attempted to acquire the rights and get the development going. It was just taking an incredibly long time. We couldn't figure out why. And then at a certain point, Amy said, oh, Wayne Wang wants to direct this. I'm like, oh, that would be great. But I already knew from San Francisco. And then also Ron Bass once. And one thing I said to Amy from the very, very, very beginning, I knew enough to know this. I said, you have to be involved in the writing because it's the telling of the story. It's your voice. It's not everyone can write like this. So please, just like, I don't know anything about screenwriting. It's like, we'll get you a co-writer. We need your voice. I can't imagine. So she found that co-writer in Ron Bass. And Ron was like, also had a strong producerial kind of, instincts. And this deal took so long. And then they came back to me, I think it was like 2 years later, because it was like the whole time trying to make a deal. And they said, we have a window now to work on the script. We don't want to wait any longer. I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry. But they said, when we have the script, we'll come back to you because you've been there for a long time. So I had no rights. I had nothing.
Wow.
So they did, and I think they thought it would be helpful to have Oliver and myself involved in the project. So that was how that happened. And then we took it around to every studio. Everybody said no. I mean, I hear like Chris Lee, who was running TriStar at the time, said, "Oh my God, I tried to sell this," and they were like, "Can you put more white people in it?" So that was a general comment. But bless his heart, Jeffrey Katzenberg greenlit the movie. And I always make a point of saying that Jeffrey has been actually an incredible force in the industry because number one, he mentored so many women. I know so many women, especially in animation, who he, paved the way to have really amazing careers. And also, I mean, he's responsible for Kung Fu Panda and Mulan and Joy Luck Club. And like he had some, vision for how Asian content could be mainstream. And yes, so he was the single person who agreed to.
He also had a very incredible vision to be able to see through all of the noise and get to the essence of the story. Like when he bought Pretty Woman, it was an R-rated movie by Jonathan Lawton called 3000 that he said, "Oh, this is Cinderella. This is a fairy tale that everybody will see." And he had a way to see that this wasn't an Asian experience. This was something that mothers and daughters and people could enjoy in every culture. And I think that's proving even more true. The world's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we're seeing with all these different cultures, especially Asian cultures in our world now with Squid Game and K-pop Demon Hunters and the list goes on, that it doesn't matter. If there's a great story, people can intuit it. It doesn't have to be exactly your experience to relate to it emotionally. And you've been very good about making sure that the cultures are combined, and you've been at the forefront of doing all of these amazing movies that bring different cultures and throughout your career, and now the things you're doing with which we'll get to, the activism and the stuff you're doing down the line, but you've always been great at bringing cultures together.
I feel like I never knew better. Like, and also part of that was we're all driven by healing childhood wounds, I think.
Of course,
And so
yes.
I want to create a community where I can belong,
Right.
where it's okay, where we can tell our stories authentically and still be part of the mainstream. And so really I feel I've gotten very lucky along the way because I've had the support, but I really just completely followed my instincts. And sometimes my ignorance worked in my favor because I just didn't know how hard it would be in some cases. So yeah, I don't know how to work any other way. It's everything I do is by instinct, and I plan to nothing. I mean, I really didn't. I didn't know I could be in the movie industry at all. I didn't know I could make a movie like nothing was. It was just kind of in the moment. Oh, I would like to see this happen.
Oliver Stone is one of my absolute heroes. So give me, if you can, encapsulate it. What were some of the biggest takeaways from Oliver during your time working with him?
I really adore the guy, and I want him. I feel like he has more movies left in him. So my experience with Oliver, first of all, the first time I met him was actually through an ex-boyfriend. And this ex-boyfriend had made a documentary in Thailand. And Oliver at the time had just written Year of the Dragon. And he wanted to grill him about what was like working in Thailand and this and that. And so we're all going to get together for dinner. And I arrived separately from my then boyfriend. And I show up it was actually weirdly at Mezzaluna in Soho. I remember this so well. And Oliver comes, leaping out of his chair. He's like, "Do you want to be in my movie?" I'm like, I'm not an actor. He's like, I'm making a movie. Should I give your name to Alex Ho? I was like, I'm actually having dinner with you, Oliver. Did you know that? He has such a I love that he has this childlike enthusiasm, and he just responds. I think maybe that's, where we connected actually, because we're both like, whatever, it's like we're not following rules. He's making up his rules, and I didn't know enough to have rules. And I remember when I first started with him, I said, Oliver, what kinds of movies do you want to make? How many movies? What are the budget levels? What genre? He's like, ad hoc, ad hoc. I'm like, okay. And I took that to mean it's like when you find something you love, then you don't have rules. Like you just do what you respond to. And that's kind of how I've really led the rest of my life and work, uh,
That's great
because
advice.
He's just said ad hoc, ad hoc. He's like, I don't know, like, and then he surprised me a lot, like what he chose. Jola Club was obviously something that leaned more towards my taste. And like, I don't know if he would have done it on his own, but he gave me the freedom to find projects that I really responded well to. And then he had other things that I helped him service. I helped him on his projects, but I was mostly producing other people's movies. And we had a really good thing going, I think, because he was the 800-pound gorilla at the time. He had won multiple Academy Awards, and he was, for some reason, he doesn't like me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think he carved a whole new path for historical or reality-based movies. I mean, the Steven Spielbergs were not, the Ridley Scotts were not making historical movies at the time. He was the only one of that caliber who was taking real life subject matters, people, Kennedy, Vietnam War, Nixon, and he, much of our time together was talking about Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and all these historical events because he was so affected by that period. And he was a real history buff. And what we used to joke about with Oliver was, there are other people, especially if we were traveling, we're like, okay, we need 3 rotations of people to keep up with them. Cause he'd get up in the morning, he'd write, and he'd be like, he'd call it all hours of the day. He's like, what do you think? And then I'm like, okay, hang up.
Wow.
But, he was in a hurry because he had so much. And when I was working with him, he had all these films that he wanted to make. He had like already established in his mind what his, what the films were going to be. He had the whole trilogy about Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. So he had so many things lined up that he knew he wanted to do. So it was a lot of energy, and we had all sorts of people. We had like Tibetan monks in our, coming through our office. It was so funny. We literally had like 3 different Tibetans working in our office so it was a very wild, we introduced, okay, I'm sorry, I could go on forever, but this is crazy. And so Danny Sugarman wrote a book called Wonderland Avenue because he was kind of a groupie, roadie to the Doors. So we were making the Doors. Oliver was always doing this. He'd like make one movie and then he'd find like an adjacent movie. It was like, oh, let's make a movie about Danny Sugarman and his relation to the Doors because we were doing so much research. Anyway, and then we were also looking at the Iran-Contra affair, and Fawn Hall came to our office, and Danny Sugarman, this admitted heavy drug user, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll was his life growing up. And Fawn Hall, who worked for Oliver North and shredded documents, and they got married later.
Oh my gosh. Incredible.
Danny died and she married Oliver North.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
it's incredible.
So many crazy things. We shared an office with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like for a time we were renting offices. There's so many stories. It was like a wild time. Oliver was making one movie, directing a movie a year. I was producing a movie. It was just like this. I look back on that time, I'm like, oh my God. It was wild.
It was a great time in the movie business. Wall Street is one of my favorite movies of all time, and Platoon, and he just such an incredible filmmaker. I want to jump ahead now to the Academy, which you went from very chaotic Oliver Stone, Oliver North, Fawn Hall, Danny Sugarman, to stepping into the role of president of the Academy at a time that was very chaotic.
My journey to the Academy. I have been a member for 25 years or so, but for up until about whatever it was, 6-8 years ago, I had like nothing. I know exactly. Up until 2016, 9 years ago, I had nothing to do with the Academy except for getting my DVDs and voting. In 2016, Chris Rock was the host, and there was the whole meme going around, Oscars so white, Oscars go white. So it was like, oh my God, they're having a black MC. That sounds great. He did this wonderful monologue. But then shortly into the show, he said, and now I want to introduce you to the PricewaterhouseCoopers accountants. And out come trotting 3 young Asian children with giant briefcases. And it was just so hurtful because we have been fighting all our lives against nerdism. Like I thought we were all nerds. I mean, literally, as I said, I never met a creative person as growing up. So, anyway, that was terrible. And then later, Sacha Baron Cohen said, "Oh, those little yellow people with tiny dongs, the minions." Okay, so strike 2. So I'm with a bunch of friends and I'm feeling really kind of queasy about this, but I was like, is it funny? Or do people think it's funny? And why is Chris Rock making jokes about Asians? I mean, I thought we were all in this together, non-white people. And I was literally thinking of writing an editorial. I started writing one and then somebody called me and said, we're writing a group letter. I'm like, oh, that's even better. Let's get as many signatures as possible. We started calling around to everyone. I didn't even know who was in the Academy. I was like, are you? I just call anybody I thought might be. Are you? Ang Lee ended up signing in and George Takei and Sandra. I was like, so we got a whole group of people together and we wrote this letter, delivered it to Dawn. And the first response was like, oh, sorry, we didn't mean to be hurt, whatever. It was kind of lukewarm. And we said, no, wait, you don't understand. This is really hurtful. And then Dawn was really wonderful and said, okay, come in and meet. And then she said a weird thing, which was so good. She said, bring as many people as possible. Because she knew it was kind of like something that was going. I think somebody leaked the letter. It kind of went viral. We had this meeting. Long story short, at the end of the meeting, and I had an office in Century City at the time where we actually, like, the Academy had such a resonant, intimidating feel to it at the time. Even as
Sure.
Academy member, I was like, oh my God, we're going to go meet the leadership of the Academy. And so we had literally 2 or 3 meetings in my office in Century City to discuss what we were going to say, who was going to say what, like have a whole really well planned out agenda. So we go have the meeting and Lorenza Munoz was the chair of membership and awards at the time. And after the meeting, she said, let's go out to lunch. So we chat, have this whole thing. In the meantime, I now know there's like 150, 200 Asians in the Academy that I didn't even know before because like all these people signed a letter. I was like, oh, I just like this is like how I think. I was like, oh, let's go have brunch. Let's go have a meal. Let's go do this. So we were like but we were so nervous about, can we call ourselves like, we wanted to have a name for us. And it's like, can we use the word Academy in it? Or, so anyway, long story short, I got involved first with the museum inclusion committee because the museum was being prepped at the time. I was on the executive committee of the producers branch. And then they made me a governor at large. There's 3 governors at large. So I was named a governor at large with Devon Franklin and Rodrigo Garcia. So we started at the same time. So that would have been 2019. And then I was elected chair of certain committees a couple years in, membership and governance and this and that. And then David
President.
termed out. And then, yeah.
And so what were the biggest, I know that you guys during your tenure brought in the stunts. And so what were some of the other things during your tenure that you guys really focused on? Besides also broadening the membership, which has been fantastic, by the way.
Yes. No, that was one big. So I was lucky to have started around the same time as Bill Kramer, the new CEO. So it was like we had a blank slate. I mean, it's not really a lot of traditions you have to keep up with, but I was like, I said, these are my priorities. And he said, that's one of them was internationalization of membership and really making the organization I was trying to future-proof the Academy. Like I could see the ratings were going down. It was like getting a little dusty and then the slap and all this happened. I was like, let's really try to inject some great energy, some real relevance, let's change the culture. Let's remind people this is, and not only remind people, but like really make it a member-driven organization. Because, when I started meeting with people, I was like, wow, there's so many great ideas. And there wasn't really a strong mechanism for the ideas to float upwards, from members to leadership. It was like, it felt very top down, felt very elitist. And I understand it's like very typical of so many other, organizations that are old, right? That's more of a classic hierarchical structure. But one of it is really creating more opportunities, like having affinity groups, having more member meetings, going to more festivals, meeting people where they are, like going and actually meeting people, hearing what their ideas are. We have such a feedback loop now of, oh, here's some ideas. We have different ways of incorporating, people can write in questions, and there's lots of member meetings, individual branches, but also a yearly, one for all members. So that was one thing. I did bring up AI a lot. I was a little bit of a squeaky wheel. I was like, this is coming, and it's coming hard and fast. And it was just difficult for us. We did have one day-long AI program. We had a lot of different people speak, and so that was great. And they just did another. So it was, but I was like, we somehow have to address a lot of big issues, a lot of things. And then also with the awards, I really felt like it was getting kind of snarky, like not the tone was getting a little bit like, why are we eating our own? I was like, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate.
Right.
So I tried to bring a culture of inclusion and celebration to and really engagement. So I think what's changed a lot is member engagement overall, and people are seem to be more excited to be involved now. The board is quite large, and I heard prior there was really a lot of they went on forever, and it was hard to get things done, and there would be leaks. Even when I was a governor before I became president, I was like, wow, somebody's it was also during the pandemic. So all the Zooms were happening with everybody home, and so it was easier. Like some journalists would be calling our comms department about something that had just been discussed 5 minutes earlier.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
my.
Wow.
So there wasn't a lot of trust at different times, and there was factionalism. So really trying to build consensus, I would say.
So you went from a member that just got the DVDs and had the card and then worked your way to becoming president of the organization. What does the Academy mean to you now?
It was such a gift to be able to look at things from a bird's eye view and really get to know so many people and hear the ideas, the love of cinema. It was quite a high to know how much the Academy still meant to so many people, and it still means so much to me. It was especially in these very trying times, I felt like we are a real community, and we really can affect change, and we can do it without getting ensnared in the politics at large, because I feel like what we have in common is this shared love of cinema, which kind of transcends it all. Like, it doesn't matter what your politics are, but we have a shared love of cinema, and we have so many really skilled craftspeople who can talk about what they do. And so the mentorship, the education, having the museum was I was like, no matter what happens to the Academy and the Oscars, we've got this museum that's going to live on forever, and that's going to help create this love, and pass it on to future generations. So it was really, and the staff at the Academy, I have to say, this is a not-for-profit organization, and I feel like the staff is just a list all the way, and really care. They put so much wonderful heart and skill into, competence into what we're doing, constantly trying. So it really evolved a lot. And I think with Bill at the helm, it's becoming a place where just everything is reviewed all the time. It's not stagnant. It's very dynamic. And the world is dynamic, and the society and the film industry is very dynamic. So it's always evolving. I think that's the thing that is really heartening, is that we could, reform or transform the organization, this 100-year-old organization.
And speaking of evolving, you've worked at such a high level with such incredibly talented people, and you've been the president of the Academy, and you have such a love for cinema, and you've been in all of those rooms, as you said, with these dinners and luncheons, and been inspired by all these creative people. And there is a general um, headline in the media that the business is cratering, that it's going down. No matter what the box office does, it's going to be compared to pre-pandemic box office, and then streaming and consolidation, and et cetera, et cetera. And you are a person who is such an activist, and you've been involved in all these huge high-level conversations with these incredibly creative people. Where do you come out in the hope for the business, and what can you give us that could inspire us, especially the younger generation, which I worry so much about, because I do want the young Janet Yangs to be inspired to come do this. And it's hard because, as you said, and I actually watch the Golden Globes with some trepidation every year, because we invite all these stars to sit in that room, and then they get roasted for 15 minutes. Generally, Nikki did a great job this year, and I'm like, well, these poor people are just sitting there, just getting their asses handed to them, when all they've done is tried to make something wonderful and been nominated for it. And so I'm glad that you said that, because I think the Academy should take on a level of more celebration of what we do and how hard it is. And like you've said many times, it's such a miracle that anything gets made. And so what kind of optimism and inspiration do you have? Because you've been in these rooms with the most creative people, and you've operated at such a high level. What kind of and you're a teacher as well, and an educator. So explain to me, like, what are you saying to your students, and what are you saying to the young people to give them some hope?
Well, it is something I think a lot about how to frame the industry. They're all these eager students coming, and number one, they want to know, is there a job for me out there?
Exactly.
And I'm like, no guarantees. Things are definitely evolving, but people love good stories. And I think the level of engagement and knowledge, I'm sure you've been to many preview screenings and you hear people talk about it. And even back then, when the studios did this regularly, I was like, wow, the people that they just, brought in off the street, they have a lot of knowledge and interest in like how the sausage is made. And now that's becoming only more so, I think, because of social media and everybody's sharing. So I think great storytelling, great stories are never going to go away. The format, we've already, one huge change, of course, is streaming. I'm hoping that Ted Sarandos keeps his word, that should he buy Warner Brothers, that he will continue to celebrate movies in theaters and allow movies to have their day in the sun that way. But the reality is things are changing too. So what I teach is creative producing. I try to give them a breadth of knowledge. Not in the olden days, if you want to be a writer or a director, you write a great screenplay, you make a great short film, and then that might actually get you noticed and get you an agent and get you more work. I said, that happens so rarely these days, almost not at all. I said, so I want to give them exposure to so many things. Maybe they'll find they may end up doing exactly what they think they want to do now, but it may be through casting or post-production or agency work or whatever. They need to see what the whole ecosystem looks like. And I think you've probably seen the media map, the constellation of, how things have changed. Like, this is Meta and this is like studio,
Right.
So I've said them that. I've said, this is the reality today. And you have to recognize that. And now we have the specter of AI coming in and, into all sorts of parts of our lives. So I try to give them a reality check, but I also try to give them enough knowledge about what's happening everywhere and saying, look, people, if the AI companies have anything to do with it, we're going to have so much leisure time on our hands because there'd be so much of the labor that, the human labor will be replaced perhaps by robots. And I actually think, regardless of what jobs are taken or not, I do think that there is a huge consumptive habit now on the part of everyone, and we are, unfortunately, we're at all data points, but people want to watch things, but they want, so it's not going to go away. I sometimes wonder, it's like, why are the AI companies not trying to cure cancer and save the planet and do all these things? But I think they're very, very aware that we humans, more and more and more, like this idea that so at one time people were saying, oh, people can't sit through a 2-hour movie, but they can sit and watch TV for 8 hours. So clearly it's not about just not having the attention span. People will get engrossed in something if they like it, if they get involved with the characters and the story. So we were all constantly watching. I think I was at my sister's birthday party over the weekend, and it was she was a lawyer and a journalist. So it was all lawyers and journalists, but their level of knowledge and understanding about the industry, they were asking me very sophisticated questions about the movie business, and they were all following. I was like, this is fascinating. People really love what we do.
Yeah.
And we love what we do. So I know, and we can't imagine, like, it took me a while to find this thing that I love, but because I didn't know it, but we can't imagine I can't imagine another job that allows me to bring so many different interests and points of curiosity. And like, I'm reading things like, oh, that would be, or whatever. That's to get inspiration from almost anywhere and be able to apply it in our work. I think that's very rare and wonderful.
Yeah. And the fact is, people do love what we do, which is why the AI companies are spending so much money to show that they can create these little videos because it gets so much attention. And as they're going to raise money, they need the attention. So they are trying to cure cancer and other things with AI, but that doesn't get the same number of clicks and attention in media that it does when you create a Bigfoot skiing down a ski hill.
Yeah.
And being funny. So it all goes back to, I think, what you said about those movies that first went into China. Those movies were emotional. They were about human experience. They were about civil rights. They were about love. They were about loss. They were about humanity. And I think the same applies today. I think the same thing for the audience today. If we focused on that, if we focused on stories that you could just take the stories between Love Story and Heat of the Night and Spartacus and those movies Roman Holiday and those movies that you brought to China, those movies would work the same today because they're about the human experience. And they're done at such a high level, and they're about how we struggle as humans to connect and to overcome obstacles. Those stories are always going to last. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that when we get so business minded, because we're like, okay, what's the thing that the audience is going to pay the most money for? What's going to be the broadest reach? But as you said, Joy Luck Club spoke to you so deeply, and you felt exposed in kind of that Killing Me Softly way that the song exposed
exactly.
her. And you're one person, but it reached the whole world because we're all in this together, and we're all humans, and we all have very similar experiences. And I think we can't, as artists, lose sight of that, because yes, we have to make the quarterly earnings and we've got to make profit, and we breathlessly report the theatrical results, and we breathlessly report the number of billions of hours that certain things are viewed on streaming. But at the end of the day, making those stories that speak to you really deeply is the most important thing.
I really believe that.
I really, really appreciate you doing this, Janet. I'm such a huge fan. You always were like such a huge star to me. And again, you worked for somebody you were partners with somebody that I just absolutely worshiped. And also for somebody I've never met and worshiped from afar. But I always like to end the interview with this question: best memory on set.
I'm debating between two, but
You can do two.
Well, this one, because we talked a lot about Joy Club. My parents, of course, really didn't understand or particularly like what I was doing, what they thought I was doing, and they really didn't know. But when we were shooting the Joy Club, I invited my mom to the set because they had since moved from New York to the Bay Area. And we're sitting in the salon where we're shooting the scene of Tai Chin and Tamlin Tomita at the beauty parlor, and she's standing behind, Tamlin's standing behind Tai Chin. It was Auntie Lindo and Waverly, and they're in the mirror, and I'm standing on the side with my mother, looking in the mirror at this other mother-daughter pair. It was just such a meta moment because that was the pairing that I most associated with. And
Incredible.
so it was just like, oh, and I think something clicked for her as well,
Amazing.
And that movie they had bragging rights to with their friends at the mahjong table because they were like, oh, because all their friends were like, oh my God, this is movie. So that was kind of a turning point, I think, because they just didn't quite understand. I mean, they understood when I worked at MCA, but then when I went to Oliver, they were like, oh, and I couldn't exactly brag about, I didn't say, oh, go rush out and see The Doors, Anyway, I would say another moment was on the set of People versus Larry Flint. And Courtney Love was extraordinary. And there was something when she is dying in the bathtub and Woody Harrelson and she did have a really good chemistry and he's crying and I was crying. Like it was so heartbreaking to watch that scene. I just remember it so well. And it was also another crazy set. And, Milos is a director that just loved his actors and let them do whatever. So there's a lot of improvisation on that set. So we were like, wonder what's going to happen today. We had to cut a lot of pages from the original script because there was so much improv. But, anyway, that I remember that I was like, wow, it is possible to feel the emotion in the moment, in the performance. So
both of those stories I love so much because it's exactly what we were talking about. They're just simple human moments that affected you deeply.
Exactly.
So, well, you're such an inspiration and you're a hero of mine, and I really appreciate you doing this.
You're so sweet.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Producer's Guide. If you're a fan of this podcast, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. And if you got any questions about producing, send me a DM on X at Todd_Garner. I want to thank my producer, Steve Delamater. And until next week, I'm Todd Garner. See you then.